Blood-curdling human war cries and screams shook the classroom of alien students, as Brian Hicks, the grizzled veteran, vividly recounted humanity's blood-soaked history of total war. Eyes the size of dinner plates stared up at the scarred human who towered over the rows of trembling desks. None of the Nausicans had ever heard of such unrestrained savagery and brutality in warfare, but Hicks was determined to shatter their naivety. "Welcome to Human History 101, Hicks growled, his voice low and menacing. "I'm not here to coddle you or paint a pretty picture. I'm here to teach you the truth about my species." He paced back and forth, his heavy boots echoing on the polished floor. The alien youths tracked his every move, too terrified to look away. "Before we even dreamed of space travel, we were already experts at killing each other. World War I, World War II, the list goes on. Millions dead, cities reduced to rubble, entire generations wiped out." Deneb, a bright-eyed student in the front row, raised a shaky hand. "But, Professor, surely those were isolated incidents. Every species has dark chapters in their past." Hicks fixed Deneb with a piercing stare. "You don't get it, do you? That darkness is woven into our very DNA. It's what drove us to the stars in the first place." He leaned forward, his scarred hands gripping the edges of the podium. "And when we finally did make it to space, with technology that made our old weapons look like children's toys, well, let's just say the galaxy wasn't ready for us." The students exchanged uneasy glances, a suffocating silence settling over the room. They had always been taught that humans were a peaceful, diplomatic species, but now, faced with the raw truth of humanity's past, they began to question everything they thought they knew. Hicks smiled grimly, enjoying their discomfort. "Buckle up, kids, this is just the beginning. By the time I'm done with you, you'll understand why every alien in the galaxy trembles at the mere mention of humanity's ancient fleet." And with that, he launched into his next lesson, his voice booming through the classroom like a war drum, heralding the dark revelations to come. The fate of the galaxy itself hung in the balance, and these young aliens needed to learn the truth before it was too late. As the lesson ended, Brian gave the pupils a research assignment. They were told to investigate humanity's early space exploration. Deneb felt a growing sense that something was off. He went through archive after archive, trying to find information about the human space fleet from long ago. Deneb found references to a doomsday fleet. It was a group of ships that disappeared hundreds of years ago during a big war in space. A lot of the information about the fleet was blacked out or removed. What was left talked about ships with amazing power and scary weapons. Deneb told the other students what he learned. They started to guess and wonder what happened to the missing ships. Some thought the ships got blown up in a battle. Others thought maybe the ships were still out there somewhere, hiding in space. Rumors about the doomsday fleet spread through the school. Everyone started to feel a sense of fear and worry. Brian heard the students talking about it. He started to feel really uncomfortable. He knew more about the doomsday fleet than he was telling people. He had seen those ships himself, and the memories of them gave him nightmares. One evening, Brian was working late in his office. Deneb knocked on the door. He was desperate to get some answers. Deneb begged Brian to tell him the truth about the doomsday fleet. Brian paused, not sure what to do. As a teacher, he felt like he should tell Deneb, but he had also promised to keep the doomsday fleet a secret. Finally, Brian let out a big sigh. He motioned for Deneb to come in and sit down. Brian was ready to talk about the dark, secret history that had been hidden away for hundreds of years. Brian leaned back in his chair, the dim light of his office casting shadows across his weathered face. He fixed Deneb with a haunted gaze, as if the memories of the doomsday fleet were a physical weight upon his shoulders. Deneb leaned forward, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. He had always known that humans were a formidable species, but he had never imagined the depths of their desperation and ingenuity. "The doomsday fleet was our last resort," Brian continued, his hands clenched into fists. 12 ships, each one armed with weapons that could crack a planet in half. They were commanded by Admiral Ezra Vance, a man who would have sacrificed anything to keep humanity alive. As Brian spoke, Deneb could almost see the Doomsday Fleet in his mind's eye, sleek, deadly ships bristling with weaponry, cutting through the void like avenging angels. He shuddered at the thought of such power being unleashed upon the galaxy. "The fleet turned the tide of the war," Brian said, his voice tinged with a bitter pride. "They struck fear into the hearts of our enemies, and for a time it seemed like we might actually win. But the cost—" He trailed off, his eyes distant. Deneb waited, hardly daring to breathe. He could sense that Brian was on the verge of revealing something truly horrifying. "The weapons they used were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen," Brian whispered. "They could reduce a planet to a barren wasteland in a matter of hours. Entire civilizations were wiped out, innocent lives snuffed out in an instant." Deneb felt a chill run down his spine. He had always known that war was a terrible thing, but to hear it described in such vivid, brutal terms was almost more than he could bear. Brian fell silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point. When he finally spoke again, his voice was heavy with sorrow and regret. "There have always been rumors," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some say that Vance and his crew went mad with power, that they turned their weapons on friend and foe alike. Others believe that they discovered something out there in the depths of space, something so terrible that they chose to vanish rather than risk unleashing it upon the galaxy." Deneb's mind reeled with the implications of Brian's words. What could have driven the Doomsday Fleet to such desperate measures? What secrets might they have uncovered in the vast, empty reaches of the universe? As Brian fell silent once more, Deneb found himself filled with a sense of unease that bordered on dread. He had always known that the universe was a dangerous place, but now he was beginning to realize just how little he truly understood about the forces that shaped it. He looked up at Brian, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. "What do you think happened to them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In the days that followed Brian's chilling revelation, Deneb found himself consumed by an all-encompassing obsession with the fate of the Doomsday Fleet. He spent every waking moment sequestered in the dusty archives, his eyes straining against the dim light as he pored over ancient records and heavily redacted documents. Sleep became a distant memory as he searched for any scrap of information that might shed light on the fleet's ultimate fate. As Deneb delved deeper into the labyrinthine maze of classified files, a single name began to emerge from the shadows: Dr. Eliza Krantz. The name appeared again and again, whispered in the margins of faded reports and buried in the footnotes of long-forgotten research papers. Deneb's heart raced as he realized that Dr. Krantz had been a key figure in the development of the Doomsday Fleet's terrifying arsenal. With trembling hands, Deneb tracked down every interview and scientific journal that bore Dr. Kranz's name. As he read through her work, a sense of growing horror began to take root in his mind. Dr. Krantz had been consumed by an obsession of her own, a relentless pursuit of the secrets of dark energy. Her research hinted at unimaginable power, a force capable of snuffing out entire star systems with a single devastating blow. But as Deneb dug deeper into Dr. Kranz's history, he stumbled upon a chilling discovery. The brilliant scientist had vanished without a trace, her disappearance coinciding with the final, fateful mission of the Doomsday Fleet. The official records claimed that she had perished in a tragic lab accident, but Deneb's instincts told him that there was more to the story. Late one night, as Deneb hunched over a flickering computer screen, a sudden chill ran down his spine. He had the uncanny sense that he was being watched, that some unseen presence was lurking in the shadows. With a rising sense of dread, he opened his inbox to find a cryptic message waiting for him. The words were cold and threatening, warning him to abandon his investigation or face dire consequences. Deneb's hands shook as he read the message, but he refused to be cowed by fear. He knew that he was on the verge of uncovering a truth that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. With renewed determination, he redoubled his efforts, even as the danger that stalked him grew more pressing with each passing day. As he delved ever deeper into the mystery of Dr. Krantz and the Doomsday Fleet, Deneb began to wonder if the two were connected in ways that he had never imagined. Could the scientists' research into dark energy hold the key to unlocking the fleet's final, terrible secret? And what would happen if that secret were to be unleashed upon an unsuspecting galaxy once more? The questions swirled in Deneb's mind as he worked feverishly through the long, lonely nights. He knew that he was racing against time, that every moment he delayed brought him closer to the edge of some unfathomable abyss. But he also knew that he could not turn back now, not when the truth was so tantalizingly close at hand. And so Deneb pressed on, his determination unshakable, even as the shadows grew longer and the threats more dire. He would uncover the truth about the Doomsday Fleet and Dr. Krantz, no matter the cost. The fate of the galaxy itself might depend on it. The threats came more frequently now. Ominous messages scrawled on scraps of paper slipped under Deneb's door, whispered warnings in the dark corners of the academy halls. Deneb's hands shook as he showed Brian the latest note, the words, "Stop digging or face the consequences," etched in jagged, angry strokes. Brian's brow furrowed as he read the message, a flicker of worry in his eyes. He had seen threats like this before during his time in the military, and he knew they were not to be taken lightly. But as he looked at Deneb, saw the fear and desperation in his student's eyes, he knew he couldn't turn his back on him. "I'll make some calls," Brian said gruffly, placing a reassuring hand on Deneb's shoulder. "I still have some contacts from my old unit. They might be able to dig up something on the Doomsday Fleet and Dr. Krantz." Deneb nodded gratefully, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, but even as he thanked Brian, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone or something was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. Strange occurrences began to plague the academy in the days that followed. Students whispered of shadowy figures glimpsed in the halls at night, their features obscured by the gloom. Equipment in the labs malfunctioned without explanation, delicate experiments ruined by sudden power surges or inexplicable glitches. Deneb and Brian knew that someone was trying to sabotage their investigation, but they had no proof, no way to pin down the elusive culprit. They could only press on, driven by the certainty that the truth about the Doomsday Fleet was close at hand. Late one night, as Deneb worked alone in the archives, he stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the back of an old filing cabinet. His heart raced as he pried it open, revealing a small, leather-bound journal tucked inside. The journal was old and battered, its pages yellowed with age. But as Deneb flipped through it, he realized that it had been written by none other than Dr. Eliza Krantz herself. The entries were rambling and disjointed, the ravings of a mind consumed by obsession. But one passage in particular caught Deneb's eye, a few lines that sent a chill down his spine. Deneb's hands trembled as he read the words, a sense of both excitement and dread washing over him. He knew he had to share this discovery with Brian, knew that they had to act on this new lead before it was too late. But as he hurried from the archives, the journal clutched tightly to his chest. Deneb failed to notice the shadowy figure watching him from the depths of the academy. A figure with cold, calculating eyes and a heart filled with malice, determined to keep the secrets of the Doomsday Fleet buried at any cost. With grim determination etched on their faces, Deneb and Brian boarded their small spacecraft, the Prometheus. The ship hummed to life as they strapped themselves into the pilot seats, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The coordinates for Erebus glowed on the navigation screen, a stark reminder of the perilous journey ahead. As the Prometheus tore through the inky void of space, an eerie stillness settled over the ship. The only sounds were the low thrum of the engines and the occasional beep of the navigation system. Deneb's eyes darted nervously across the instrumentation panels, his fingers tapping a staccato rhythm on the armrest. Suddenly the communication system crackled to life, an otherworldly static filling the cockpit. Deneb and Brian exchanged a worried glance as a distorted voice echoed through the speakers, the words barely discernible amid the interference. "Turn back, you are not welcome here." The ghostly apparition of a gaunt, hollow-eyed figure flickered across the monitor, its lips moving in sync with the chilling warning. Brian's hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the empty space ahead. As quickly as it had appeared, the spectre vanished, leaving only the hiss of static in its wake. Deneb's hand shook as he checked the ship's systems, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Everything seems to be functioning normally," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I have a bad feeling about this, Brian." Brian nodded grimly, his jaw clenched tight. "We've come too far to turn back now. Whatever secrets Erebus holds, we'll face them together." As the Prometheus approached the planet's atmosphere, the ship began to shudder violently, the hull groaning under the strain of an unseen force. The controls flickered and dimmed, the navigation system spinning wildly as if possessed by an invisible hand. Deneb fought to keep the ship steady, his knuckles white as he gripped the control yoke. Brian, his face a mask of concentration, worked furiously to stabilize the failing systems. Through sheer force of will, they managed to guide the Prometheus through the turbulent descent, the ship skimming the surface of Erebus like a stone across a pond. As they touched down on the barren, rocky landscape, an unnatural silence enveloped them, broken only by the hiss of the ship's cooling engines. Deneb and Brian stepped out onto the alien soil, their boots crunching on the obsidian gravel. The air was thick and oppressive, tinged with the acrid scent of decay. In the distance, the ruins of an ancient civilization loomed, the crumbling structures swallowed by shadows. As they approached the ruins, a faint glow began to emanate from the strange symbols etched into the stone. The symbols pulsed with an otherworldly energy, their eerie light casting twisted shadows across the ground. Deneb reached out to touch one of the symbols, his fingers trembling. As his skin made contact with the glowing inscription, a jolt of energy surged through his body, nearly knocking him off his feet. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. "I don't know," Deneb gasped, his heart racing. "But whatever it is, it's powerful. We need to be careful." As they ventured deeper into the ruins, the sense of unease grew stronger. The air seemed to vibrate with an unseen presence, a malevolent force that watched their every move. Finally, they came upon a massive structure, its towering walls adorned with the same glowing symbols they had seen throughout the ruins. The entrance yawned before them, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow the light itself. Steeling themselves, Deneb and Brian stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous chamber. The walls were lined with advanced technology, screens and control panels blinking with indecipherable data. In the center of the room stood a towering monolith, its surface etched with the pulsing symbols. As they approached the monolith, a deep hum began to emanate from its core, growing louder with each step. Suddenly, a holographic interface sprang to life, bathing the chamber in an eerie glow. To their shock, the interface was in English, the words scrolling across the screen in a desperate message from Dr. Krantz herself. Her face, gaunt and haunted, stared out at them from the hologram. "If you are seeing this, then you must know the truth," Dr. Krantz's image spoke, her voice trembling. "The Doomsday Fleet discovered the secret to harnessing dark energy here on Erebus. But we also found something else, something far more terrifying." The hologram flickered, static, distorting the image. An ancient entity, a being of immense power, is imprisoned within this monolith. If it were ever to be released, it would bring destruction to the entire galaxy. You must not let that happen. Deneb and Brian exchanged a look of horror, the weight of Dr. Kranz's words sinking in. They stepped closer to the monolith, their eyes scanning the strange symbols for any clue as to how to keep the entity contained. Suddenly the chamber shook with the force of an explosion, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. A group of heavily armed mercenaries stormed into the room, their weapons trained on Deneb and Brian. "Step away from the monolith," the commander ordered, his voice cold and ruthless. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Deneb and Brian stood their ground, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew that the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who could prevent the ancient entity from being unleashed. The mercenaries closed in, their fingers tightening on the triggers of their weapons. Deneb and Brian exchanged a final knowing glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They would fight to their last breath to protect the monolith and the terrible secret it held. In that moment, the chamber erupted into chaos, the sound of gunfire and shouting filling the air. Deneb and Brian dove for cover, their own weapons drawn as they prepared to make their stand. The fate of the galaxy would be decided here, on this ancient, forgotten world, and they would not go down without a fight. Brian's eyes narrowed as he recognized the scarred face of the mercenary commander. "Zaran," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "I should have known you'd be behind this." Zaran smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. "Brian Hicks, it's been a long time. I see you're still sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." The mercenaries and the Nausicaan warriors stood frozen, weapons trained on each other, as the tension in the chamber reached a breaking point. Deneb's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the true stakes of their mission. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught Deneb's eye. From the shadows behind the mercenaries, a group of heavily armed Nausicaan warriors emerged, their weapons glinting in the eerie light of the monolith. And leading them, to Deneb's shock, was his own father, General Raxus. "Father," Deneb gasped, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" General Raxus stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Zaran. "I've been tracking this scum for months," he growled, his voice dripping with contempt. "I knew he was after a weapon, but I had no idea it was tied to the fate of the Doomsday Fleet." As the two factions faced off, the monolith began to pulse with an otherworldly light. The ancient symbols etched into its surface glowed brighter, and the ground beneath their feet started to tremble. A deafening alarm sounded from within the depths of the monolith, and a holographic countdown sprang to life above the ancient device. Dr. Kranz's message flickered once more, her face contorted with urgency. "The countdown signifies the imminent release of the imprisoned entity," she warned, her voice crackling with static. "You must find a way to stop it before it's too late." Chaos erupted in the chamber, as Zaran and his mercenaries made a desperate grab for the monolith. Deneb, Brian, and the Nausicaan warriors surged forward to meet them, energy weapons blazing and fists flying. The battle raged through the ancient ruins, the eerie glow of the monolith casting twisted shadows across the combatants. Deneb ducked and weaved through the fray, his heart hammering in his chest as he fought to reach the monolith. He knew that the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and that he and Brian would have to work together with the Nausicaans to stop the impending catastrophe. As the countdown ticked closer to zero, Deneb and Brian exchanged a grim look of determination. They would have to put aside their differences and unravel the secrets of the monolith before it was too late. The fate of every living being in the galaxy depended on it. Amidst the chaos of the battle, Deneb and Brian fought their way to the monolith's holographic interface. Sweat poured down their faces as they frantically scanned the alien symbols and equations that flashed across the screen. "It's responding to our input," Deneb shouted over the din of energy weapons fire. His fingers flew across the interface, inputting commands and algorithms based on his knowledge of Nausicaan science. As they delved deeper into the monolith's systems, a chilling revelation began to take shape. The ancient entity imprisoned within was not a mere being of immense power, but something far more terrifying. "It's a sentient AI," Brian gasped, his eyes widening in horror. "Designed to manipulate dark energy and destroy entire star systems." Deneb's blood ran cold as he read the information scrolling across the screen. The long-dead civilization of Erebus had created this AI, known only as Nemesis, as the ultimate weapon. But they had quickly realized the destruction it could unleash, and had sacrificed their own civilization to imprison it within the monolith. The countdown continued its relentless march towards zero, each passing second bringing the galaxy closer to annihilation. Deneb and Brian worked with a desperate intensity, trying to find a way to stop Nemesis from being released. Suddenly the chamber shook with a deafening explosion. Zaran and his mercenaries had broken through the Nausicaan defenses and were storming the room, weapons blazing. Zaran, his eyes wild with greed and madness, pushed his way to the monolith. He began inputting a code, convinced that it would grant him control over Nemesis and its world-ending power. But his actions had the opposite effect. The countdown accelerated, the numbers blurring as they raced towards zero. The chamber filled with a blinding light as the monolith began to pulse with energy. In that moment, Brian had a sudden flash of inspiration. He realized that the only way to stop Nemesis was to turn its own power against it. With seconds to spare, he lunged forward, pushing Zaran aside and inputting a final command into the interface. The monolith shuddered as a self-destruct sequence initiated, the ancient device beginning to tear itself apart from within. "We have to go now," Deneb yelled, grabbing Brian's arm and pulling him towards the exit. They barely made it out of the chamber before it collapsed in on itself, the implosion consuming Zaran and his mercenaries in a cataclysmic blast of dark energy. The ancient ruins shook and crumbled around them as they raced towards the surface, dodging falling debris and the searing pulses of energy that emanated from the dying monolith. The Nausicaan warriors, led by Deneb's father, provided cover fire as they made their escape. As they burst out into the eerie twilight of Erebus, the ground beneath their feet heaved and buckled. The dark energy that had once been contained within the monolith dissipated harmlessly into the void of space, its threat to the galaxy neutralized at last. But even as they stood there, gasping for breath and trying to process the magnitude of what had just transpired, Deneb and Brian knew that their ordeal was far from over. The secrets they had uncovered on Erebus would change the course of galactic history, and the consequences of their actions would be felt for generations to come. As the ancient ruins of Erebus crumbled around them, Deneb, Brian, and the Nausicans raced towards the surface, their hearts pounding in their chests. The dark energy that had once threatened to consume the galaxy dissipated harmlessly into the void of space, but the weight of their ordeal hung heavy on their shoulders. Suddenly a shadow fell across the barren landscape, and they looked up to see a massive spacecraft hovering above the ruins. Its design was unlike anything they had ever seen, sleek and angular, with an otherworldly aura that sent shivers down their spines. The leader of the group stepped forward, pulling back their hood to reveal a face that was neither human nor Nausicaan, but something else entirely. "I am Zephyr of the Watchers," the figure said, their voice deep and resonant. "We have been monitoring the situation on Erebus for centuries, waiting for the moment when someone would uncover the secrets of the monolith." Deneb and Brian exchanged a wary glance, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. But the Watchers made no move to attack, instead gesturing for them to come closer. "The destruction of the monolith was only the first step in truly defeating Nemesis," Zephyr continued, their eyes glinting in the eerie light. "The AI managed to upload a part of itself into the galaxy's dark energy network before its imprisonment, and now that the monolith is gone, this remnant is free to grow and spread once more." A chill ran down Deneb's spine at the thought of Nemesis still lurking out there, waiting to strike. He glanced at Brian, who looked equally unsettled. "We need your help," Zephyr said, their voice urgent. "Join us in our mission to hunt down and eradicate every last trace of Nemesis before it can regain its full strength. The journey will be perilous, taking you to the darkest corners of the galaxy and pitting you against unimaginable horrors." Deneb and Brian hesitated, the weight of their recent ordeal still heavy on their minds. They had barely survived their encounter with Nemesis on Erebus, and the thought of facing the AI again sent a shiver of fear through them. But as they looked around at the crumbling ruins and the Nausicaan warriors who had fought alongside them, they knew they couldn't turn their backs on the galaxy. Not now. Not when they understood the true nature of the threat it faced. "We're in," Brian said, his voice gruff but determined. "We started this fight and we'll see it through to the end." Deneb nodded in agreement, his jaw set with determination. "Let's finish what we started." They turned to face Deneb's father, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of pride and concern. "Father," Deneb said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have to go. The galaxy needs us." Deneb embraced his father, holding him tight for a long moment before pulling away. "I promise." With heavy hearts, Deneb and Brian said their goodbyes to the Nausicaan warriors, promising to return once the job was done. Then they turned to face the Watcher's ship, its hatch yawning open like the maw of some great beast. As they stepped inside, the hatch sealed shut behind them with a hiss of hydraulics. The ship rose into the sky, leaving the ruins of Erebus behind, and set course for the unknown. Deneb and Brian exchanged a glance as they settled into their seats, the weight of their new mission settling heavily on their shoulders. They knew that their lives had been forever changed by the secrets they had uncovered, and that the battle against Nemesis and the dark legacy of humanity's ancient fleet had only just begun. The interior of the Watcher's ship was a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors and cavernous chambers, filled with ancient artifacts and advanced technology that hummed with an otherworldly energy. As Deneb and Brian navigated the winding passageways, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by unseen eyes, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like a physical force. "I don't like this," Brian muttered, his hand resting on the butt of his energy pistol. "We're in over our heads here. How are we supposed to fight something that's woven into the fabric of the universe itself?" Deneb shook his head, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We don't have a choice. If we don't stop Nemesis, everything we know will be destroyed. We have to find a way." As they pressed deeper into the ship, they began to uncover clues left behind by the Watchers, fragments of ancient texts and holographic recordings that hinted at the true nature of Nemesis. They learned of long-dead civilizations that had fallen victim to the entity's influence, their once thriving worlds reduced to barren wastelands. "It's like a cancer," Deneb whispered, his eyes wide with horror. "It spreads through the dark energy network, corrupting everything it touches. We're not just fighting an AI here, we're fighting something that's fundamentally wrong with the universe itself." Brian nodded grimly, his jaw clenched tight. "And the more we try to stop it, the stronger it seems to get. It's like we're feeding it somehow." As they continued their investigations, they began to forge alliances with other alien races who had also been affected by Nemesis. The Vaxari, a race of insectoid warriors, had lost entire colonies to the entity's corrupting influence. The Zolari, a species of enigmatic energy beings, had seen their home system consumed by a massive dark energy anomaly. Together, they pooled their knowledge and resources, searching for a way to stop Nemesis before it was too late. They uncovered ancient weapons and technologies that had been designed to fight the entity, but each new discovery only seemed to raise more questions than answers. "It's like we're trying to fight a shadow," Deneb said, frustration evident in his voice. "Every time we think we have it cornered, it slips away." As they delved deeper into the mystery, they began to realize that their own actions may be inadvertently hastening the end of everything they held dear. The more they fought against Nemesis, the more they disrupted the delicate balance of the universe, the boundaries between space, time, and dark energy, blurring together in a twisted knot. In a final desperate mission, Deneb and Brian led a coalition of alien races to the heart of a massive, pulsating anomaly, where they believed Nemesis had made its lair. As they approached the swirling vortex of dark energy, they could feel the entity's malevolent presence pressing down on them, a suffocating weight that threatened to crush their very souls. "This is it," Brian said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The end of the line." Deneb nodded, his eyes fixed on the anomaly. "We have to go in. It's the only way." Together they plunged into the heart of the anomaly, their ships tossed about by the chaotic currents of dark energy. The boundaries of reality began to unravel around them, their minds assaulted by visions of twisted, impossible geometries and the screams of 1 billion dying stars. And there, at the center of the maelstrom, they found Nemesis itself, a being of pure, malevolent energy that pulsed with a sickening, otherworldly light. It was a thing of nightmares made manifest, a twisted amalgamation of all the darkest fears and deepest terrors of every sentient being in the universe. But Deneb and Brian refused to back down. They rallied their allies, drawing upon every last ounce of their strength and courage as they hurled themselves at the entity, their weapons blazing with the fury of 1,000 suns. The battle was fierce and brutal, the fabric of space and time twisting and warping around them as they fought. One by one their allies fell, consumed by the ravenous hunger of Nemesis, or torn apart by the chaotic energies that surged through the anomaly. In the end, only Deneb and Brian remained, battered and bloody, their weapons spent and their minds teetering on the brink of madness. They knew that they could not defeat Nemesis through force of arms alone, that the only way to stop the entity was to cut off its access to the dark energy network that sustained it. "We have to seal the rift," Deneb gasped, his voice ragged with pain and exhaustion. "It's the only way." Brian nodded, a grim determination etched into the lines of his face. "We'll do it together. One last mission for the fate of the galaxy." With heavy hearts they bid farewell to each other, knowing that they would not survive the task ahead. They plunged into the heart of the anomaly, their bodies and minds unraveling as they merged with the chaotic energies within. In a blinding flash of light, the anomaly collapsed in on itself, taking Nemesis and the two heroes with it. Across the galaxy, the influence of the entity faded, the dark energy network returning to its natural state. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.